Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Marani.
And I'm Antonio Mayo.
And today's episode is about introduction to sensitivity and retention labels. And we have with us Antonio Mayo, who is the expert in this space, and he has a lot of passion about sensitivity and retention and classification and security aspects in Office 365. And he's done this for many, many years. And we'll be talking for the next 15 minutes to 20 minutes about this specific topic. So the floor is yours.
Great. Well, thanks, Mike. So as many people know, Microsoft 365 and Office 365 provide some great capabilities for identifying the sensitivity of your information. So we've often in the past, we'd refer to that as data classification. Microsoft refers to that very much as sensitivity labels. Sometimes you hear the tools mentioned AIP, Azure Information Protection, or MIP, Microsoft Information Protection, and this is the product that allows you to do that, to apply sensitivity labels. And then they also talk about retention labels, and retention labels really are about records management, data governance as well, it's sometimes referred to, but applying labels to documents that identify how long do they need to be retained for, from a compliance perspective, from a legal perspective, from a regulatory framework perspective, how long do you need to retain these documents, and then when that time period expires, what happens to those documents?
Okay, so let's go into these sensitivity labels and what that means and where do you apply it, like in Office 365, if I am in SharePoint or if I am in my Outlook. How is it applied? Is it applied automatically? Is it applied everywhere? Can I break it down to specific services within Office 365?
Sure. So there's a couple of places where sensitivity labels are applied. So to repeat, we're focusing specifically on sensitivity labels. Retention labels are different. So it's important to not confuse sensitivity labels with retention labels. With sensitivity labels, you apply those to either documents or emails.
Okay.
That's it. You apply them to emails in Microsoft Outlook. You apply them to documents in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, or on your desktop. You don't apply sensitivity labels today in SharePoint Online or OneDrive for Business or Teams.
Okay.
That's not there today. That's coming. But right now, you apply them to documents in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and on your desktop. There might be a few other Office applications where that capability is coming, or in emails and Outlook. It's also important to understand that when you are applying them manually, so when I say you apply them to those things, that's referring to manually applying sensitivity label. So a person is choosing this document or this email is classified as sensitive or restricted or secret or top secret or something related to its sensitivity. Okay, that's user-based classification we refer that to, and a person does that in one of those apps. So again, on your Windows desktop, in Outlook, in Word, Excel, or PowerPoint.
So I can go and specify this is an internal only or public use or confidential or sensitive. Right. I can define those labels myself.
That's right. The other thing to remember is when you're applying those labels manually to emails, they get applied when you send the email, not before. So you don't apply these to emails that are sitting at rest in your mailbox. You apply them as you're composing an email and sending an email. To documents, they get applied in Word, Excel, and PowerPoint when you save them. Okay. So when you create a new document or an open document, you save it. That's where the sensitivity label gets applied. And there are other ways to automatically apply sensitivity labels also. For example, there is the AIP scanner. That is a separate piece of software that comes with AIP, Azure Information Protection, and it will scan your network file shares for documents, and it'll look for sensitive data within those documents, and based on some rules you configure, apply those sensitivity labels to the documents.
So you mentioned it scans the network shares. What about if I have to automatically apply the sensitivity labels on documents stored in SharePoint?
Not happening today.
Not happening today.
There is a feature coming out in preview that supports that. There are some nuances to how and when those labels are applied, but today the AIP scanner scans those documents in emails. Now, you touched on a point a moment ago. You can define your sensitivity labels in the Microsoft Security Center or the Microsoft Compliance Center or in the Office 365 Security Compliance Center. So in those three admin centers, you can define your sensitivity labels and then they get pushed out to those places. In there are places to automatically apply sensitivity labels. There is a configuration for automatically applying sensitivity labels. When you configure your sensitivity labels in either the Security Center, the Compliance Center, or the Security and Compliance Center, there is a setting for automatically applying labels. And what that does is when you send an email, the body of the email gets scanned, and based on the contents, it'll automatically apply a label then.
Okay.
When you save a document, the document gets scanned, and based on what it finds in the document, it'll automatically apply a label. So today, when you go to the Security and Compliance Center and you configure an auto-apply rule for sensitivity labels, those are when it automatically applies them. It is not scanning your content as it exists in SharePoint today and applying a sensitivity label.
Got it. So question to you from that perspective. So I am composing an email and I flagged it as internal only, for example, but the send to is for someone external, is not part of my company. Does that sensitivity label prevent me from sending the email when I click on send? Or
not necessarily. It brings up a policy tip. Okay. So you can configure the label so a policy tip appears informing you of that.
Okay.
So the user can still make a decision about sending that or not.
Got it. So you mentioned it's for documents and emails today, and SharePoint and Teams is coming up. So in the future, I'll be able to apply a sensitivity label at a SharePoint site specific, whereas that SharePoint site would be only internally or sensitive or confidential.
Correct. So I should backtrack for a second. There has been a method for defining sensitivity labels like that for SharePoint sites before. Okay. It was a separate configuration that you'd perform with PowerShell. Those labels, I believe, would be stored in AD, and then you could choose them when you're creating a new site. Right. Those are moving to being able to be created and managed as part of your regular sensitivity labels.
Got it.
So that is a functionality that was announced at Ignite, which is coming hopefully in Q1 or Q2 of this year.
Now, do I get any dashboard on the type of documents or the number of documents or who's actually saved documents that are sensitive? Are there any dashboarding that will give me some insights?
Yes.
Of my organization?
Yeah. So when you in the console in the Microsoft Compliance Center or the Microsoft Security Center, you can actually see a label analytics dashboard, and it'll show you various metrics on which labels are being used, how often they're being used, which documents are labeled or are not labeled that you can use.
Awesome. So let's move on into the different type of labels. We have the retention labels. We've talked about sensitivity labels, the type of content, and a lot, like you said, a lot of people get confused between sensitivity or mix them up between sensitivity and retention, which is targeted to what we called it back in the days as records management.
Correct.
So why do we use them other than from a retention and disposition perspective? Is there a specific use cases from an information management or information governance perspective?
So there is. So retention labels are primarily used for retention, right, as the name suggests. But you can create a retention label. You can configure a retention label that doesn't apply any retention. You can use it just as a label like you would any other piece of metadata. Right. Or you can actually associate, I'll call it a deletion policy with it. So for example, if you want to allow people to flag documents or emails with a particular label and just have them deleted, not go through any sort of retention or disposition period, you can actually treat them as deletion policies that'll essentially run a cleanup process on your content and delete content that has particular labels associated with it.
So the actual user will have to flag that to be deleted before it actually the policy applies to it?
No, the deletion is with the policy.
Okay.
So I configure a label.
Mm-hmm.
That's where I configure the deletion. So for example, I could say, if a document has this label, delete it after, I don't know, 30 days of the label being applied, 1 year of the label being applied. And then it'll automatically be deleted after that time period. Traditionally, records management has to do with a disposition process. So I assign a retention period to a document. That retention period starts on a particular trigger. The trigger could be when the document's created, when it was modified, when it was labeled or based on some event. Based on that trigger in the retention period, once the retention on that document expires, then typically it has to go for a disposition review. And that means somebody has to approve that the organization is fine and not at risk for deleting it. And then it actually gets deleted. So once you have those approvals.
And that disposition review, does it work with Flow? Is it how it is? And how does that?
No, unfortunately. So the disposition review. So in Microsoft 365, Office 365, there is a disposition review console. Okay. So when a document's retention expires, it gets added to the disposition review list. People that have been configured to be the reviewers for that label will receive a notification. And that list of documents that accumulates that are eligible for disposition, it's actually security trimmed based on the users you put for disposition review. Okay. So if you receive a notification, you go to the disposition review console, you only see the documents that you are permitted to approve the disposition of. And then from there, from that console, you have either three actions you can choose from. You can say, yes, dispose of this document. You can say extend the retention period on this document, or you can relabel the document with a different retention label.
Got it.
But there is, unfortunately, today, no approval workflow that you can run through Flow. That is something that we have been asking for, because in many organizations, disposition has to go through multiple steps of reviewers or approvers before they can be disposed. In some larger organizations where they have a disposition team, the disposition team are the people that click the button saying dispose. But they are not the people that approve that you're allowed to dispose of this.
Exactly.
So we're looking forward to some sort of a flow-based approval process being integrated with that someday, so that we can build our own approval processes around dispositions.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So now we've gone, let's talk SharePoint a bit.
Okay.
Into a flat architecture. We have all the modern SharePoint sites. Okay. Where each site is a site collection. Traditionally, from a records management, you go and apply, for example, an information management policy at the site collection level, and you define that policy. And then when the actual policy kicks in, whatever that retention is for 7 years plus created date or modified date, it goes into different stages of disposition, very similar to what we have in M365 of Office 365. However, we've gone into a flat architecture. And then let's take one company and it's onboarding into Office 365. They're migrating all the content into different SharePoint site collections. And then they're using Teams, they're using Exchange. How do you classify that? How do you go and say some documents will have to live for 5 years and some documents will have to live for 7 years because you're applying it to all the SharePoint site collections? Do you have to define, how do you define the content that will meet those policies?
That's a great question. And do you mind if I extend your question to both sensitivity and retention?
Absolutely.
Okay, so when you take the migration scenario into account, let's talk sensitivity first. You're going to migrate, let's say, user mailboxes into Office 365. That's one of the first workloads that you migrate.
That's right.
There is no way today to classify your emails for sensitivity as they sit at rest in mailboxes. So if you have a requirement to all our emails have to be classified for sensitivity before they get moved into Office 365, like some governments have, that is not possible today.
Okay, good to know.
Like I said earlier, classifications are applied to emails when you send them.
Okay.
The automated application of sensitivity labels to emails happens on sending also. I go to send an email, it evaluates the contents based on the rules I configure, it automatically applies a label. The user didn't have to go select one. That is the automated application of sensitivity labels.
Correct.
With documents, the only way to classify them for sensitivity before they go into Office 365 is through the AIP scanner.
Okay.
So you have them sitting on network file shares or drives, and you run the AIP scanner with some conditions configured, and it goes through, evaluates every document, applies sensitivity labels there. Okay. The reason that is done that way is the sensitivity label is actually a piece of metadata that sits inside the document or inside the email. Okay. It's added to the email as an X header and to the document as a piece of metadata in one of the particular chunks in the document. Okay. So the advantage of that is as documents travel around your organization, the sensitivity of it travels with the document.
Got it. Okay?
So keep that in mind. With retention, retention's different. The retention label does not live inside the document. The retention is a piece of metadata in SharePoint or in OneDrive.
Correct. That's correct.
Right? It's not in the document. It doesn't travel with the document necessarily.
Right. That's correct.
So in that case, with retention, you have rules you can configure to automatically apply retention labels. And those can work off of sensitive data within the document or content types or other metadata fields associated with your documents.
Awesome.
So you can configure rules using what's called the KQL, the keyword query language,
right,
to actually evaluate the content for content type, other metadata fields, sensitive data within the document, and based on that, those rules you configure, automatically apply a retention label. So there, what you would do is you would migrate your content into SharePoint, and then you would run your automated rules and apply that retention, those retention labels to documents after the fact.
Yeah.
But the automated retention rules run on a particular schedule.
Yes.
I think it's once every 7 days they run.
That is correct.
That way, you would configure your rules. You want to test them first. You're gonna have to wait up to 7 days to test them. Once you've validated they're going to work, then you might run it on a big chunk of your content.
Right.
So in the case of retention, you're going to migrate your content in first, and then apply your retention labels using those automated rules.
Got it. Good to know. It's good to know that there are options that the user does not have to worry about actually applying labels manually for retention perspective.
That's right.
We have an automated way through the keywords or through the content types of metadata, and we can automatically tag metadata for specific documents or content types with SharePoint. So it's a good way to take that pressure off the end user from an information management and governance perspective, that we have retention. All they have to deal with is just managing the actual content, and at some point that the retention label will kick in.
That's right. And organizations get to the point of needing those automated rules really quickly, because the alternative to the automated rules is a user manually selecting a retention label.
Exactly.
In the case of sensitivity labels, it's a little bit different, but in the case of retention labels, most organizations have a meaningful retention schedule, right? And the idea of going to a drop-down in every document and having to scroll through a list of, I don't know, more than 20 retention labels, which most organizations have a lot more than 20, is really difficult, right? First, you need people to know what the retention schedule is. Second, that drop-down cuts off the name of them after a certain number of characters, right? And it's not that many characters. I think it's 14 characters. And then second, as soon as you have any meaningful number, it's really hard to select them. So the automated application retention labels becomes important. It also becomes important to know what licenses you need to have access to the automated application retention labels, right? Anything other than applying retention labels manually requires an E5, an Office 365 E5 license. So that includes if you have a default retention label on a library. For that to apply a retention label to your documents, you need an Office 365 E5 license. A lot of people don't realize that. It feels like just a default, but it is the automatic application of retention labels. And according to the Microsoft product team, what we've heard is you need an E5 license for that.
That's correct.
As well, any of the auto apply rules also need an E5 license.
Yeah, anything, like to your point, yes, I've seen it. Anything that outside of a manual applying of the labels, it is an E5, unfortunately. Any automatic applying of any label, it is an E5.
Exactly. Also, the other records management capabilities like managing a file plan, the disposition review process, event-based retention, using the API for retention labels, all of that requires an E5 plan.
Exactly.
Yeah. So any real records management, unfortunately, requires an E5.
E5. Awesome. Well, that was very, very informative and very useful. I've learned a lot as well. Good. Thanks for sharing the information.
Absolutely.
And we will look forward for another episode on M365. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.